Hello, I'm Christine Crabtree, one of the team ministry here in the Bradford North Methodist Circuit. Welcome to this time of reflection. If you listened to the reflection about Psalm 137, we were thinking then about the Israelites being in a strange land and wondering how could they sing the Lord's song in that strange land. They'd been forcibly taken away from their country into Babylon. And it was the practice there to try to assimilate the people into the life and the culture of Babylon so that they would begin to work for the good of that regime. And so it was that Daniel was among the young Israelite men who were chosen to spend time learning the language and literature of the Babylonian people. He found himself there in a position where he had to work for the good of those who were his captors. And he committed himself to his task. But he didn't fully give himself over. He did not forget who he was. When it came to time for food, because the food that they were offered was not kosher, Daniel gave up eating meat so that he wouldn't be sinning against God. And he continued with his pattern of prayer and worship through his time in Babylon. He distinguished himself and was appointed to high office. And we're going to read now from Daniel chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps stationed throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, including Daniel. To these the satraps gave account, so that the king might not suffer loss. Soon Daniel distinguished himself above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to appoint him over the whole kingdom. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom. But they could find no grounds for complaint or any corruption, because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. The men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So the presidents and satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the councillors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an interdict that whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Therefore, King Darius signed the document and interdict. Although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go to his house, which had windows in its upper room open towards Jerusalem, and to get down on his knees 3 times a day to pray to God and praise him, just as he had done previously. Daniel distinguished himself over all the people, all those appointed to serve the king. He did his work well. There was no negligence, no corruption that could be found. And yet he was still an Israelite. His heart was in Israel. His heart was given over to his God, and he continued his pattern of worship. And this meant that he wasn't torn in two by the conflicting demands. he could come back to a place of prayer where he was himself committed to his God. He prayed 3 times a day, morning, during the day, and in the evening. In the morning, he would have committed the day to God, thinking about the things that would happen and the people that he would meet and the decisions that he would have to take. He would commit these all to God and ask to serve God in all that he did. During the day, he would make time to leave his work and come home again to that place that looked towards Jerusalem and pray again. And later in the day, he would offer to God all that had happened in order to get things out of his mind, out from his thoughts, so that he might have a restful sleep without his thoughts plaguing him as he laid himself to rest. Did Daniel have the first rule of life that we know about? He spent time with God. He prayed 3 times a day. He had a special room set aside for prayer that looked towards Jerusalem, that gave him that focus. He got down on his knees to humble himself before God. And as well as praying, he offered praise, so that he focused upon God and upon God's greatness. God was greater than Babylon. God was greater than anything that Daniel was going to experience. And so he went into his day with that God with him, that greatness of God behind him, upholding him, sustaining him. Many might shy away from thinking of a rule of life. It's something that seems hard and inflexible. Perhaps it puts extra burdens on the day. Perhaps some feel that they're busy enough already. Or others might see themselves as a free spirit, and after all, rules are meant to be broken. But the Greek word meaning rule in this context actually means a trellis, a support for a plant to help it grow strong. And that's what a good rule of life should be. Not something to tie us down, not something that's inflexible and doesn't change according to changing circumstances, but something that helps us be ourselves, be who we are in the midst of all that we have to focus on. A good rule will bring us balance between prayer and sacred reading, between time for friends and family, between rest and relaxation, and our daily work. A rule will give us time for creativity, for fun, for the things that we enjoy. And it will give us that balance between all those things. Monks who were enclosed in monasteries and who lived by the rules of their founder would live a balanced life. Whatever they were doing, a bell would ring to remind them that it was time to move from one activity to another. And so they would move from worshipping God in their work in the garden or in the scriptorium to worshipping God through the liturgy of the services that they would sing and read through together. It was time to remind them that whatever was not done would be left undone until they came back to it. It was a time to focus their minds now on something else, to give them that balance as they went through that day. And so a good rule of life is something that liberates us, that gives us balance and freedom to say, I've done enough work for today. I've given enough time to that project for today. Now is the time when I take rest. Now is the time when I pursue my hobbies. Now is the time when I do something creative. Now is the time when I really focus on my family or on taking time to be with friends. It gives us that breadth of life and saves us using up all our energies focused on just one or two things. And at this time when life is very different, it's a good time to think about what that life will be when we get back to normal. Will we get back to the normal that we had before? Or do we want to think about a new normal, a new way of being? Can we get into good habits now at this time that might sustain us into the future? I've certainly been enjoying a daily walk in the park, and that's a habit that I would like to keep up when we get back outside. Something that I want to do, that I found that's good for me, that helps me physically and mentally in that time. It's a good time to think things over, to pray, to give myself a little bit of space. And I want to keep that going. So a good rule gives time for you to be yourself, to be that self before God, to be yourself in all the different ways that you need to be. Daniel was true to himself. He took time away from people and their demands for prayer, to come back to the center of himself, where God was, to focus upon Jerusalem, where he had learned the things that sustained him. God calls you to be you. He calls you not to be someone else, but to be yourself, because he delights in you. And he wants you to come back to the center of yourself and find him there. He delights in you. Wouldn't that be a good rule? To tell yourself 3 times a day that God delights in you. And so you can find strength to face whatever it is that you have to face. Why not give that a go? 3 times a day. Tell yourself, God delights in you. And then you delight in God. And move from that in the strength of God, knowing that he is with you and goes with you into whatever you face. And he is greater than all things and will give you the strength that you need. May you know him with you always. God bless.